ever the same. One of the things I learned this week in preparing for this little talk is that when she says that, when it says that his dealings with men are ever the same, it's because obviously God never changes. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. But one of the things that he's doing here in this thing about the reality is that his dealings with men are ever the same is that he has one object in mind, and one object alone. And that is those of us who will stand on that sea of glass with the harps of God, and who've got the victory over the beast and his mark and the number of his name. That's God's purpose in history, in human history. And he's the creator, he made us, and for him, he sees the goal, but he's getting us to see it step by step. And in so doing, he's giving us hope that he is the one that is getting us home. So it's just like Nalo's little trip to Hawaii, but this one is a trip into eternity if we'll just let the one who's leading out ahead of us and we'll follow. And Ellen White makes a wonderful statement. In December of 1844 and February of 1845, she had one vision, but the vision was given in two separate visions. But there's actually it's actually telling the same story in the two visions. The two visions are one vision. But in them, she describes that Christ had set up a great light behind the people of God in the midnight cry. On August the 12th of 1844, this light that God set up behind the people of God, she says, was a great light that would lead them all the way to the city of God if they would keep their eyes fixed on Jesus as he led the way. And that's similar to Nalu's story. She saw that God was stepping out and leading, going ahead of her and opening the way. And that's what God has done in the Great Advent Movement. And the Great Advent Movement is not a detached history from sacred history. It never was, and when you understand the story, it is part of that journey that's God taking with the church that ends on the sea of glass and in the earth made new. And so on our timeline here, we have the story of Joshua, we have the Judges, we have King Saul, we have the apostasy of Jeroboam, we have the reform of Elijah, we have Isaiah's testimony that the kingdom of Israel will not stand, that it will be broken. In 723 it is broken. The kingdom of Judah is also broken. They go into captivity. Both Judah and Israel go into captivity for 2,520 years. We see the captivity of the city of Jerusalem and its destruction by Nebuchadnezzar. We see the 70 years captivity. We see the return of the exiles in the first decree of Cyrus, Darius, and then Artaxerxes Longimanus, which begins the advancing movements of this point right here really had its origin back here where they crossed the Jordan. When Israel crossed the Jordan, God was on his way to the Sea of Glass. God was on his way to the Sea of Glass. When Ellen White was shown in vision the Ark of God's Testament open in heaven, and she saw it, and she was pointing to Revelation chapter 11, verse 19. Let's go there. Revelation chapter 11 and verse 19.
What did you say?
Revelation chapter 11 and verse 19. Now, this text, after the great disappointment of 1844, it was this text that allowed them to see where God had been leading them in the Great Advent Movement. It was leading them to see that the Ark of His Testament was opened in heaven, and in it, Ellen White saw in the vision the light, a halo of light around the fourth commandment. But let's read it. It says, "And the temple of God was opened in heaven, and there was seen in his temple the Ark of his Testament. And there were lightnings and voices and thunderings and an earthquake and great hail." Involved with God and his people in the journey to heaven, that's what it meant for the children of Israel coming out of the wilderness of Egypt. The wilderness of Sinai for the 40 years of wandering after coming out of Egypt. And they finally crossed the Jordan, and we all know the story. they were told to go forward, and the ark went ahead of them. And as the priest stepped his foot into the river, the Jordan parted, and the walls of the water banked up. And then all the children of Israel walked across on dry land in Jordan. Now, we're going to learn something today about the worship of the god Baal, and what it meant for him to be worshipped as what the people believed that he was, and for what a marvelous and most glorifying demonstration of who God really is when that priest stepped into the Jordan River and that river parted, it declared that he was the God, and there were no others. You'll find out why in just a little while. We're going to get there. But what went ahead of him was the ark of his testament. But now in Revelation 11:19, John on the island of Patmos, how many years do you suppose it was between when the ark crossed the Jordan and John has shown this on the island of Patmos in the year 100 AD? Millennium have gone by for us. But this is the journey that God started when he crossed the Jordan with his people Israel. And this journey that he started when he crossed the Jordan with Israel is the same journey that he was on when he opened up the little book of Daniel to William Miller in the year 1816 and 1819. It's been one forward progressive movement until God would have a people that would represent himself in the earth. And his name is going to be glorified at last. But the journey begins really when it really begins before Judges. I mean, before the Judges and before Joshua. It really begins when they cross the Jordan. It begins where he takes them as a slave people bound in Egypt, and he emancipates them, and he delivers them from the hand of Pharaoh. It's really in those settings where God is showing us that he's going to raise up a people in this movement, and he wants us to see something in the history of the Bible, in his story. Ellen White calls it his story. History is spelled H-I-S-T-O-R-Y. And it really is, it is his story.
Yeah, his story. Amen.
Okay? History is his story. And so, let's look at some things concerning where they were. We're gonna skip the time of Joshua. That's for another study. I want to fast forward, and we're going to go to the time of the Judges. And the reason I want to do that is because you're familiar with some of this material we're going to cover today. But I want you to get a good understanding is the Judges don't take place. The only reason the history of the Judges comes into existence in reality in human history is the fact that the Israelites crossed the Jordan. And God was ahead of them with that Ark of that Covenant. And he was moving forward. Despite the trouble and the history we know in the children of Israel, despite all those things, God was leading the people. And despite all the troubles we see today at the end of the world in the Adventist church, trust me, this story is telling us that there's one who's trying to get us home. But we are the ones that are standing in the way.
Amen.
And that's the story that Paul writes. He says, these things were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world would have come, that we should not do as they did. And this is all that God is really waiting for a people that will follow him. And if we will follow him, we're going to go home.
Amen.
We're going to go home. Let's go to Judges chapter 1. Now, before we read Judges chapter 1, I want to bring you up to speed on something that you need to know. We all know the story of Balaam, right? Okay. Now, in the story of Balaam, there are some players involved. We have Balak and Balaam. We have the children of Israel, and we have the Moabites. We have the, finally, when Balaam couldn't curse Israel, but they devised what the book of Revelation would later call the doctrine of Balaam. In Revelation chapter 2, we see in the church of Pergamos, which is the third church, is that right? Yes, it's the third church in the story of the churches in the book of Revelation. We are introduced to the fact that before the time of the judges, just as they were fixing to cross, just before they crossed the Jordan River, during the time of the 40 years in the wilderness, as they come up into this 40-year journey, and the Moabites see all the children of Israel, and they call Balaam to curse them because they're afraid that they're going to take the land like an ox licks up the grass. They've heard of what God is able to do for these people, and they're frightened. They're scared out of their wits. Now they should be, because trust me, they know what's ahead. Because God is no one to fool with. No, because He is. We really don't understand what we're dealing with, but Seventh-day Adventists are going to understand it here shortly. I got a good idea, but He wants us to try to grasp this before then. But so, one of the things they enter into is the sin of Baal Peor, and the sin of Baal Peor is the doctrine of Balaam. Now, one of the things that the cultures in ancient times, even going back to the time of Abraham, was the worship of this god that they called Baal. It's an old Canaanite heathenism or paganism. It's older than Abraham. It goes back to Nimrod. And so one of the things I've learned this week by preparing for this study is that this story that we gave a brief account of just already about God's progressive movement in human history, leading a people finally to the sea of glass and to the earth made new. It also involves the story of paganism. There's two stories told in one story here. And in the story that God reveals in the Bible, He's also allowing us to see this, for lack of a better term, this kingdom in which Satan operates. And the terminologies we've given to it is heathenism and paganism. This is what He called Abraham out of the land of Ur, of the Chaldees. This belief that this god that they call Baal. And we're going to cover here you're going to understand a little bit, I hope, a little bit better about who this god Baal was in connection with a text in Judges. Go to Judges chapter 2, and I have it written down here. Judges chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, it says, notice what it says. And an angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochim, and said, I made you to go up out of Egypt. Now this angel is telling the people, he's rehearsing for them some of the history that I just have rehearsed for you. And so he's telling them this history. And have brought you unto the land which I swear unto your fathers, and I said, I will never break my covenant with you. Now God is faithful. He's reminding them that He's on a journey here, and He's not going to break His covenant with you. And ye shall make no league with the inhabitants of this land. Ye shall throw down their altars, but ye have not obeyed my voice. Why have you done this? Now, we're going to fast forward now, and we're going to go down to the book of Daniel, chapter 11. Notice this word league in verse 2. Now, Daniel chapter 11, and verse 23, notice, these are God's people. They're just the descendants of the ones that He was just talking to in Judges. Notice what they do with the pagan Romans. And it says, and after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully. For he shall come up and shall be strong with a small people, and